Ready for 44 of history's ultimate facepalm moments? We're diving into real-life events so spectacularly misjudged, so astonishingly dumb, you'll wonder how on earth these people even existed. No brilliant generals here, just audacious fools who turned ambition into pure comedy. Buckle up for chaos, botched heists, absurd plans, and jaw-dropping blunders that make you feel smart just for watching. Let's get into the glorious train wrecks of history. 1. In the year 1898, a brazen adventurer named Arthur Orton approached the government of Chile with an audacious proposal. Presenting himself as a nobleman of immense wealth, he offered to purchase one of their battleships. Astonishingly, they agreed. But instead of delivering payment, Orton simply sailed the warship out of the harbor. He then attempted to sell the massive vessel to their rival nation, Argentina. When they refused, he sailed on, trying to hawk the stolen instrument of naval destruction to Ecuador. The entire affair devolved into a chaotic voyage from port to port, with Orton desperately seeking a buyer for his ridiculously oversized stolen property as the Chilean Navy gave chase across the high seas. 2. During the Middle Ages, the bones of saints were considered treasure beyond measure, and monasteries often plotted to steal these sacred relics from one another. In the 9th century, a group of monks from Conques, France, devised a plan to acquire the remains of Saint Foy. Their method was not a swift raid, but a scheme of incredible patience. One of their own became a monk at the target monastery, slowly earning their trust over a period of 10 long years. After a decade of this deep deception, he was finally given the keys to the crypt. He seized the bones and escaped. This was not merely a theft. It was the slowest, most meticulously patient heist in religious history. 3. The year 1814 saw a grand deception on the London Stock Exchange. A man named Charles de Berenger, cloaked in a military uniform, arrived in England proclaiming that the Emperor Napoleon was dead and the long wars were finally over. As news spread, euphoria erupted, and the value of government securities skyrocketed. A cabal of fraudsters who had orchestrated the entire affair immediately sold their holdings at the inflated prices, reaping a fortune. Their plan was brilliant until the escape. As they scattered, de Berenger, the central actor in the drama, was nowhere to be found. He was discovered still in his hotel room, admiring his military attire in the mirror, utterly captivated by his own performance. 4. In 1916, a group of Irish separatists planned a dramatic act of protest. Their target was a massive munitions depot on Black Tom Island in New York Harbor, situated dangerously close to the Statue of Liberty. They sought to disrupt supplies intended for the British war effort. The resulting explosion was one of the largest man-made blasts of the era, shattering windows across the water in Manhattan. The arm holding the Statue of Liberty's torch was so heavily damaged by the blast and flying shrapnel that it has remained closed to public access ever since. They didn't steal gold or jewels. They permanently removed a treasured experience from future generations. 5. During the height of the Renaissance, a gifted sculptor named Michelangelo carved a beautiful statue of a sleeping Cupid. But instead of selling it as his own work, he devised a clever scheme. He treated the marble with acidic earth and buried it, giving it the appearance of a long-lost ancient Roman relic. He then arranged for its discovery and sold it for an immense sum to a cardinal. The fraud was only unraveled when astute observers noted that the ancient masterpiece bore an uncanny resemblance to the sculptor's own distinct style. He had not just forged a piece of art, he had fabricated a piece of history itself, turning a new creation into a priceless antique with little more than dirt and a convincing tale. 6. In 1828, two Irishmen in Edinburgh, William Burke and William Hare, discovered a gruesome new enterprise. At the time, medical schools paid handsomely for cadavers for anatomical study, a demand often met by grave robbers. Burke and Hare realized it was far less effort to create their own supply. They began luring lodgers and vagrants to their boarding house, murdering them by suffocation, and selling the pristine bodies to the eminent anatomist, Dr. Robert Knox. They dispatched at least 16 souls. Their ghastly trade was not a theft of property, but a methodical harvesting of human life, undone only when one of their victims was recognized on the dissection table. 7. The affair of the diamond necklace in 1785 was a scandal that shook the French monarchy to its core. A charlatan, Jean de Valois, convinced the immensely wealthy Cardinal de Rohan that Queen Marie Antoinette secretly desired a diamond necklace of astronomical value. Desperate to gain the Queen's favor, the Cardinal purchased the necklace on credit, handing it over to Jean to act as an intermediary. Jean promptly had the necklace disassembled and sold the individual diamonds on the black market. When the jeweler demanded payment, the affair exploded into public view. The Queen, though entirely innocent, was condemned in the court of public opinion for her supposed extravagance, fueling the revolutionary fires that would soon consume France. 8. During the American Civil War, a Union locomotive named the General was stolen by a band of Confederate spies led by James Andrews. Their daring plan was to drive it deep into enemy territory, burning bridges and cutting telegraph lines to cripple the Union supply chain. The heist began flawlessly. They seized the train while its crew was at breakfast. But they fatally underestimated the train's conductor, William Fuller. A man of astonishing tenacity, Fuller first chased the locomotive on foot. Then he commandeered a simple handcar. Finally, he seized another engine and continued the pursuit in reverse. The great locomotive chase became a day-long duel across the Georgian countryside, ending only when the raiders ran out of fuel and were captured. A grand military raid foiled by one man's sheer, stubborn refusal to let someone steal his train. 9. The infamous 17th-century pirate Henry Morgan faced a formidable challenge, the heavily fortified city of Portobello. A direct assault on its 3 Spanish forts would have been suicidal. So Morgan devised a plan of profound psychological cruelty. He forced captured priests and nuns to the front of his raiding party, making them carry the scaling ladders up to the fortress walls. The Spanish defenders, being devout Catholics, were horrified and morally paralyzed, unwilling to fire upon the clergy. This hesitation gave Morgan's men the opening they needed to storm the walls and seize the city. It was a victory won not with superior firepower, but by weaponizing the enemy's own faith against them. 10. Gregor MacGregor was a Scottish adventurer who orchestrated one of history's most fantastical scams. In the 1820s, he arrived in London claiming to be the cacique, or prince, of a fictional Central American nation he called Poyais. He painted a vivid picture of a civilized paradise, complete with a capital city, fertile lands, and gold-filled rivers. He successfully sold land grants and government bonds to hundreds of hopeful British investors. 2 ships of colonists actually set sail for this imaginary kingdom, only to find themselves stranded on the desolate, swampy coast of Honduras. There was no city, no paradise, only jungle and disease. MacGregor had committed a theft not of property, but of a dream, selling a country that existed only in his words. 11. At the decisive Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485, King Richard III wore his royal crown into the fray as a symbol of his authority. In the brutal chaos of the battle, Richard was slain and the crown was lost. It was later discovered by a soldier not on a king's head, but hanging unceremoniously from a thorn bush. Lord Stanley, a powerful noble who had opportunistically switched sides during the fight, retrieved the crown from the bush. He then walked across the bloody battlefield and placed it upon the head of Henry Tudor, proclaiming him King Henry VII on the spot. It was perhaps the most significant impromptu theft in British history. A kingdom's crown, and with it a dynasty, seized from a humble shrub. 12. In Victorian London, one clever burglar thought he'd avoid doors entirely, so he slid down a chimney. Genius, right? Except he got stuck, firmly. The homeowners returned to the sound of groaning echoing from their fireplace. It took hours and a team of builders to dismantle the chimney, brick by soot-covered brick, to extract the human cork. No loot, no getaway, just a humiliated thief-turned-chimney statue. Sometimes crime doesn't pay, it just gets wedged. 13. In 1792, during the turmoil of the French Revolution, the French crown jewels were stored in the garde-meuble, a royal furniture repository. Security was surprisingly lax. A gang of thieves led by a man named Paul Miette discovered that a window shutter's lock was broken. For 5 consecutive nights, they simply climbed a rope, entered the building, and methodically looted one of the most magnificent treasure collections in the world. They worked at a leisurely pace, even stopping to drink the wine they found inside. Their crime was only discovered when one of the thieves, in a moment of sheer arrogance, tried to sell a massive blue diamond, the Hope Diamond's precursor, to a rival. Their downfall was not due to brilliant detective work, but to their own greed and impatience. 14. The city of Troy fell not to superior force, but to a legendary act of deception. For 10 years, the Greek army had laid siege to the city with no success. Finally, they feigned retreat, leaving behind a colossal wooden horse as a supposed offering to the gods. The Trojans, celebrating their apparent victory, pulled the massive statue into their impregnable city. That night, as the city slept in a drunken stupor, a hidden door in the horse opened, and a band of elite Greek soldiers crept out. They opened the city gates for the returning Greek army, leading to the complete destruction of Troy. It was a heist of an entire city, stolen not with swords, but with a hollow piece of wood and a masterful understanding of human pride. 15. In 1874, a group of Irish nationalists in America hatched an audacious plan to free several of their comrades from a brutal penal colony in Western Australia. They purchased a whaling ship, the Catalpa, and sailed it halfway around the world. The ship's captain, George Anthony, a man with no connection to their cause but a love for adventure, coordinated with agents on the ground. They successfully broke the prisoners out during a storm. The British authorities gave chase in a steamship, eventually catching up to the whaler and firing a warning shot. Captain Anthony raised the American flag and dared them to fire on it, an act that could have sparked an international incident. The British backed down, and the Catalpa sailed to freedom. It was a prison break on a global scale. 16. In the 4th century BC, a man named Herostratus wanted to achieve eternal fame. He had no great talents as a warrior, politician, or artist, so he chose a different path: destruction. He burned down the temple of Artemis at Ephesus, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. When captured, he confessed that his only motive was to ensure his name would be remembered forever. The authorities, horrified by his crime, not only executed him, but passed a law forbidding anyone from ever speaking his name again, hoping to erase him from history. The attempt failed spectacularly. His story was recorded by historians, and his name, Herostratus, became a synonym for someone who commits a crime just to become famous. He stole a wonder from the world, and in doing so, achieved his twisted goal. 17. In 1628, the Swedish Empire launched the Vasa, one of the most powerfully armed and lavishly decorated warships ever built. It was the pride of the fleet, a symbol of Sweden's military might. On its maiden voyage, it sailed less than a mile from the dock in Stockholm Harbor. Then, a light gust of wind hit its massive sails. The ship, dangerously top-heavy and unstable due to having too many heavy cannons on its upper decks, leaned over. Water poured in through the open gun ports. In front of a massive crowd that had gathered to watch its glorious departure, the mighty Vasa sank ignominiously to the bottom of the harbor. This was not a theft by an enemy, but a self-heist of national pride and treasure, caused by pure royal vanity and bad engineering. 18. The story of the 47 Ronin is a cornerstone of Japanese honor. In 1701, their master, Lord Asano, was forced to commit ritual suicide after drawing his sword in the shogun's castle. His samurai became masterless Ronin. For over a year, they pretended to be disgraced drunkards and vagabonds, lulling their enemy, Lord Kira, into a false sense of security. Their leader even divorced his wife and frequented brothels to perfect his disguise. Then, on a snowy winter night, they launched a meticulously planned attack on Kira's mansion. They captured him, offered him the chance to die with honor, and when he refused, they beheaded him. It was a slow, methodical heist, not for gold but for honor and revenge, a 2-year performance of deception culminating in a single act of brutal justice. 19. In 1835, an unemployed house painter named Richard Lawrence attempted to assassinate U.S. President Andrew Jackson. He approached Jackson and fired a pistol at point-blank range. In a 1 in 125,000 chance, the pistol misfired. Lawrence calmly pulled out a second pistol and fired again. Incredibly, it also misfired. Jackson, a notoriously tough man, was not one to stand idle. The 67-year-old president proceeded to attack Lawrence with his walking cane, beating him savagely until his aides pulled him away. The would-be assassin's plot was foiled not by security, but by a spectacular failure of his own equipment and the sheer, unadulterated fury of his intended victim. 20. In 1415, before the Battle of Agincourt, the English army under King Henry V was vastly outnumbered by the French. The night before the battle, the French knights were so confident of victory that they spent the night drinking, gambling, and deciding which English nobles they would hold for ransom. Meanwhile, the English archers were quietly preparing their positions. The next day, the overconfident, hungover, and heavily armored French knights charged across a muddy field directly into a hail of English arrows. The result was a catastrophic defeat for France. They had their victory planned and their loot divided before the fight even began, a heist of future glory that was stolen from them by their own arrogance. 21. The Elizabethan era was rife with spies and plots. In 1586, the Babington plot sought to assassinate Queen Elizabeth I and place Mary, Queen of Scots, on the throne. The plotters, led by Anthony Babington, communicated with Mary through coded letters smuggled inside hollowed-out beer barrels. They believed their system was foolproof. However, Queen Elizabeth's spy master, Sir Francis Walsingham, had already infiltrated their network. He was intercepting all the letters, having them deciphered, and then carefully resealing them to be sent on their way. He allowed the plot to continue for months, gathering all the evidence he needed before finally arresting and executing the entire group. They were caught in a trap of their own making, their secret communications serving as their death warrants. 22. In the 1860s, Mary Jane Kelly claimed she was heir to the Jennings fortune, a mythical estate. Her proof: forged family trees, aged paper soaked in chemicals, and faked signatures copied from museums. She fooled courts for years, until investigators noticed the ink on one document hadn't dried properly. It was history's most committed DIY inheritance scam. She didn't just fake a lineage, she practically built a time machine out of lies and ran it until it sputtered. 23. In 1856, a ship carrying a massive cargo of gold from the California gold rush sank in a hurricane off the coast of the Carolinas. For over a century, the wreck of the SS Central America, the ship of gold, was the stuff of legend. In the 1980s, a brilliant but eccentric engineer named Tommy Thompson finally located it. He recovered tons of gold, becoming a hero. But then the story took a dark turn. Thompson, hounded by lawsuits from his investors who claimed he was hoarding the treasure, simply vanished. He became a fugitive, leading federal agents on a multi-year manhunt. He didn't steal the gold from the ocean. He allegedly stole it from his own partners after the fact. A heist that began with a historic discovery and ended in a cheap motel room where he was finally captured. 24. During the Cold War, the CIA and British intelligence hatched a plan called Operation Gold. They decided to tap into the secret underground communication cables of the Soviet military headquarters in East Berlin. To do this, they dug a massive 500-foot-long tunnel from West Berlin directly underneath the border. The engineering was a marvel, a secret masterpiece of espionage. They successfully tapped the cables and began listening in. They believed they had a priceless source of intelligence. The only problem? The Soviets knew about the tunnel from the very beginning. A mole in British intelligence had told them everything. For 11 months, the Soviets let the operation continue, feeding the West a carefully curated mix of useless, low-level information and deliberate disinformation. The CIA's greatest heist of secrets was, in fact, a carefully staged theatrical performance put on by their enemies. 25. The Amber Room was an entire chamber made of amber panels backed with gold leaf and mirrors. A gift to the Russian czars, it was considered an eighth wonder of the world. When German forces invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, they seized the Amber Room, disassembled it, and shipped it to Königsberg Castle. But as the war turned against them, the room vanished. To this day, its fate remains one of the greatest mysteries in art history. Was it destroyed by bombing? Hidden in a secret bunker? Loaded onto a ship that sank in the Baltic Sea? The Nazis pulled off the ultimate heist. They stole something so magnificent that it seemingly vanished from the face of the earth, leaving behind only legends and a decades-long fruitless treasure hunt. 26. In 1478, the powerful Pazzi family of Florence orchestrated a plot to overthrow their rivals, the Medici. Their plan was to assassinate Lorenzo de' Medici and his brother Giuliano during High Mass at the Florence Cathedral. The signal to attack was the ringing of the bell during the elevation of the host, the most sacred moment of the service. As the bell rang, the assassins struck. They succeeded in killing Giuliano, but Lorenzo, though wounded, managed to fight his way to the sacristy and barricade himself inside. The city, instead of rising up to support the Pazzi, turned on them furiously. The plotters were hunted down and brutally executed. It was a heist for control of a city, timed to the holiest moment of a church service that failed spectacularly. 27. For centuries, the Shroud of Turin, believed by many to be the burial cloth of Jesus Christ, has been an object of intense veneration. In 1578, the Duke of Savoy decided to move the relic from France to Turin, Italy. This required a perilous journey across the Alps. The precious shroud was transported with a massive armed escort, as there were constant fears that bandits, or even rival nobles, would try to steal it. The journey itself became a massive, slow-moving military operation, a heist in reverse, where the goal was not to steal a treasure, but to prevent one of history's most sacred and controversial objects from being stolen while on the move. Every mountain pass was a potential ambush site for a holy relic. 28. In the early 20th century, a British army officer named Richard Maynardshagen became famous for his haversack ruse during the Sinai and Palestine campaign of World War I. To deceive the Ottoman forces about the direction of an upcoming attack, he deliberately lost a haversack containing fake military plans, money, and personal letters. The Ottomans found it and, believing they had stumbled upon a genuine intelligence windfall, redeployed their forces to counter the fictitious attack. This allowed the British to achieve a stunning victory elsewhere. It was a brilliant intelligence heist where the goal wasn't to steal information, but to gift wrap and deliver a package of lies so convincing it changed the course of a battle. 29. In 1788, Austrian scouts found schnapps in the town of Currensebes and started drinking. Soon, their fellow soldiers showed up, demanded a share, and fists flew. Someone fired a shot. In the chaos, someone screamed, "Turks!" and panic exploded. In the darkness, the Austrian army began firing wildly at itself. Thousands died, not from battle, but from drunken confusion. It remains one of the most ridiculous military disasters in history, sparked by alcohol and paranoia. 30. The Marquis de Sade, from whom the term sadism is derived, was a prisoner in the Bastille in 1789. As revolutionary fervor grew in Paris, de Sade, using a makeshift megaphone, began shouting to the crowds below that the prisoners inside were being slaughtered and that they should storm the fortress. His actions caused a significant public disturbance. The governor, unnerved, had him transferred to a different asylum just days before the Bastille was actually stormed on July 14th. De Sade, through his provocative actions, essentially incited a riot that he himself could not participate in. He tried to steal a moment of revolutionary glory, but was removed from the stage just before the main event began. 31. In 1817, a young woman appeared in a village in Gloucestershire, England. speaking an unintelligible language and wearing exotic clothing. She was eventually identified as Princess Caribou from the island of Javasu in the Indian Ocean. For months, she was the toast of local society, fascinating everyone with her strange customs and tales. In reality, she was a cobbler's daughter from Devon named Mary Wilcox. Her entire persona was an elaborate invention. She had not stolen money, but had perpetrated a grand social heist, stealing the trust and admiration of the upper class through pure, imaginative performance art until she was eventually exposed by someone who recognized her from her previous life. 32. In the 16th century, the Spanish Empire transported vast quantities of silver from its mines in Potosi, in modern-day Bolivia, to Europe. The journey was long and perilous. The silver was first carried by llamas across the Andes, then loaded onto ships on the Pacific, sailed to Panama, carried by mules across the Isthmus, and finally loaded onto treasure fleets in the Caribbean for the voyage to Spain. Every single stage of this journey was a potential target for pirates, rival powers, and corrupt officials. The entire Spanish colonial economy was essentially a continuous, centuries-long, high-stakes heist prevention operation, a logistical nightmare where they were trying to stop their own immense wealth from being stolen at every turn. 33. In 1588, Spain launched the Invincible Armada, a massive fleet of 130 ships sent to invade England and overthrow Queen Elizabeth I. The plan was meticulously detailed but fatally flawed. The English fleet, smaller and more maneuverable, harassed the Armada up the English Channel. Then, they sent hellburners, old ships filled with flammable material, and set alight, drifting into the anchored Spanish fleet. The Spanish panicked, cut their anchors, and broke formation, scattering them into the path of a massive storm. The Great Invasion was defeated not just by English cannons, but by bad weather and their own inflexible tactics. It was an attempted heist of a kingdom that ended in a shipwreck disaster. 34. In 1648, at the end of the 30 Years' War, the Swedish army occupied Prague. As a final act of plunder before peace was declared, they staged a systematic looting of the city's treasures, focusing on the magnificent art collection of Emperor Rudolf II at Prague Castle. It was less a chaotic raid and more a carefully organized, military-grade art heist. They methodically packed and shipped hundreds of priceless paintings, sculptures, and scientific instruments back to Sweden. Among the stolen treasures was the Codex Gigas, or Devil's Bible, a massive medieval manuscript. This wasn't a crime committed by a small band of thieves, but an entire army acting as state-sanctioned art collectors, stealing a nation's cultural heritage as a parting gift. 35. The War of the Oaken Bucket in 1325 was a conflict between the rival Italian city-states of Bologna and Modena. The entire war was sparked by a single, petty act of theft. A group of Modenese soldiers snuck into the city of Bologna and stole a wooden bucket from the city's main well. Bologna, deeply insulted by this theft of a common, everyday object, demanded its return. Modena refused. The ensuing war lasted for years and resulted in thousands of deaths, all because of a stolen bucket. It remains perhaps the most absurd and disproportionate escalation in military history, a heist where the object was worthless but the insult was priceless, proving that sometimes the silliest reasons cause the deadliest conflicts. 36. During the Second Punic War, the Carthaginian general Hannibal inflicted a crushing defeat on the Romans at the Battle of Cannae. He was poised to march on Rome itself, a city now virtually defenseless. His commanders urged him to seize the opportunity, but Hannibal hesitated. He famously declared, "You know how to win a victory, Hannibal, but you do not know how to use one." He chose not to attack, a decision that gave Rome precious time to recover and eventually defeat him. It was a moment of supreme historical irony. A general who had just masterminded one of the greatest military victories in history essentially stole his own ultimate prize from himself through a fatal moment of indecision. 37. In the 1840s, a religious group known as the Millerites became convinced, through complex biblical calculations, that the world would end on October 22, 1844. As the day approached, thousands of followers sold their homes, quit their jobs, and gathered on hillsides and in churches dressed in white robes to await the second coming of Christ. When the sun rose on October 23rd and the world was stubbornly still intact, the movement collapsed in what became known as the Great Disappointment. It was a strange kind of heist where the followers weren't robbed of their money by a con artist, but of their certainty and faith by a failed prophecy, left with nothing but their robes and the cold light of a new, ordinary day. 38. In 1204, the armies of the Fourth Crusade, originally intending to fight in the Holy Land, were diverted to the Christian city of Constantinople. Driven by a combination of political intrigue and greed, the Crusaders, instead of protecting Christendom, turned on its greatest city. They breached the walls and subjected Constantinople to a brutal, 3-day sack. They stole countless priceless ancient and medieval treasures, melting down bronze statues for coin and desecrating churches. It was one of the most catastrophic cultural heists in history, a moment when an army of holy warriors abandoned their mission and became nothing more than a glorified band of robbers, inflicting a wound on the Byzantine Empire from which it would never fully recover. 39. In the early days of the automobile, a French anarchist named Marius Jacob formed a gang called the Workers of the Night. They were gentlemen burglars who specialized in robbing the rich, using sophisticated methods and following a strict moral code. They never killed anyone and donated a portion of their loot to anarchist causes. Jacob's most famous heist was of the cathedral in Tours, where he stole a collection of priceless tapestries. However, his downfall came not from a brilliant detective but from a simple mistake. During one robbery, a drop of blood left at the scene was eventually used to identify him after he was captured for a different crime. A high-minded political thief brought down by a single clumsy accident. 40. In 1715, a Spanish treasure fleet laden with silver from the New World was caught in a hurricane off the coast of Florida and sank. The Spanish government immediately began salvage operations. This, however, attracted the attention of every pirate in the Caribbean, including Henry Jennings and Charles Vane. They saw the salvage operation not as a recovery, but as a conveniently pre-gathered pile of loot. They raided the Spanish salvage camp, overpowering the guards and stealing the silver that had already been recovered from the seabed. It was a remarkably efficient form of piracy, a heist of a recently completed heist, letting the Spanish do all the hard work of deep-sea diving before swooping in to reap the rewards. 41. The Diamond. As Big as the Ritz is a famous short story, but a real-life diamond hoax captivated America in 1872. Two cousins, Philip Arnold and John Slack, salted a remote piece of land in Colorado with low-grade diamonds, rubies, and sapphires. They then led a group of wealthy San Francisco financiers to their discovery. The investors, blinded by greed, fell for it completely, forming a mining company and paying the cousins $500,000 for their claim. The fraud was only exposed when a government geologist, Clarence King, investigated the site and realized the distribution of gems was geologically impossible. It was a grand heist of investors' fortunes, accomplished with a handful of cheap stones and a deep understanding of human avarice. 42. In 1497, a Dominican friar named Girolamo Savonarola held immense power in Florence. He preached against sin and luxury, culminating in the infamous Bonfire of the Vanities. He encouraged citizens to voluntarily turn over their worldly treasures, books, art, musical instruments, fine clothing, to be burned in a massive public bonfire. Thousands of priceless Renaissance objects were destroyed. This wasn't a heist where a thief took things for himself, but a psychological heist where a charismatic leader convinced an entire city to rob itself of its own cultural heritage in the name of piety. The people of Florence later turned on Savonarola and executed him on the very spot where the bonfire had burned. 43. The ancient Library of Alexandria was one of the greatest repositories of knowledge in the world, containing hundreds of thousands of scrolls. Its decline and destruction occurred over several centuries, a slow-motion heist of human knowledge. It suffered from budget cuts, purges of scholars, and several fires, most famously during Julius Caesar's civil war in 48 BC. Each event chipped away at the collection. There was no single cataclysmic event, but a long, tragic process of neglect and destruction. It represents the greatest theft in intellectual history, not by a single person, but by the slow, grinding forces of war, politics, and indifference, leaving humanity immeasurably poorer. 44. In 1627, Barbary pirates from North Africa, led by a Dutch convert named Jan Jansoen, sailed further than any had before, all the way to Iceland. They raided the coast, including the capital, Reykjavik, capturing an estimated 400 Icelanders to be sold into slavery in Algiers. The event was a profound national trauma for Iceland, a remote island nation that believed itself safe from such threats. It was a horrifyingly successful heist, not of gold or goods, but of people. The raiders stole a significant portion of the population of several small towns, a human cargo snatched from one of the most isolated corners of the world and dragged into the heart of the Mediterranean slave trade. So that's 44 of humanity's most gloriously spectacular failures. Brilliant in its own stupidity. Now, here's the real question. Which one made you go, "What?" the loudest? Or do you know an even more absurd historical facepalm? Drop it in the comments. Let's build the ultimate collection of history's biggest oops. Smash that like button if you survived these disasters without crying, and subscribe. Because this kind of epic human folly, it's never ending.